For a long time, there was certainty in the WNBA. Not hype, not noise, certainty. The kind that doesn't need to shout because it's already understood. At the center of that certainty stood A'ja Wilson, a player whose dominance wasn't debated but accepted as fact. She wasn't just winning games, she was shaping the identity of the league itself. Every possession she controlled, every defensive stand she anchored, reinforced a simple idea. This is what excellence looks like. Her greatness wasn't built on spectacle. It wasn't about viral moments or flashy headlines. It was about consistency, about showing up night after night and bending the game to her will without ever seeming rushed. Teammates played calmer with her on the floor. Opponents played tighter. Analysts didn't argue whether she was among the best. They spoke about her as the standard everyone else was measured against. And the league followed that lead. Marketing campaigns leaned into her image. Broadcasts framed her as the centerpiece. If you were introducing someone to women's basketball, she was the example you pointed to. Stability had a face, and it was hers. That's why what came next didn't feel like a shift at first. It felt like a glitch. Because nothing about her changed. Her numbers didn't drop, her impact didn't fade, her presence didn't weaken. The dominance was still there, as real as ever. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, attention began to drift. Not disappear, just drift. At first, it was subtle. The cameras still followed her, highlights still made the rounds, but somewhere between sold-out arenas and rising ratings, another name started slipping into conversations with increasing frequency. It didn't feel threatening in the beginning. Moments like that happen all the time in sports. A young star catches fire, captures headlines, then settles back into the rhythm of the league. But this time, the rhythm didn't return. Because Caitlin Clark wasn't just catching fire, she was changing the temperature of the entire room. Her style didn't ask for permission, it didn't wait its turn. 30-foot shots that should have been reckless became routine. Defenders picked her up near half court, and it still didn't slow her down. Games stopped being just games, they became events. People who had never followed the WNBA found themselves rearranging their schedules just to watch her warm up. And that's when the discomfort began to settle in. Not because anyone was losing, but because something new was taking center stage without following the script. For years, the league had an unspoken structure. Veterans led, young players developed. Respect was earned over time, accumulated through seasons, through battles, through consistency. The spotlight moved, but it moved with intention. Clark didn't move into the spotlight, she pulled it toward herself. And when attention moves that quickly, it doesn't just change what people watch, it changes what people value. Suddenly, the conversations inside boardrooms and production meetings started to shift. Which games deserved primetime slots? Which players drove ticket sales? Which names moved the needle beyond the box score? These weren't questions that needed to be asked before. Now, they were unavoidable. Because Clark wasn't just producing highlights, she was producing impact at a scale that couldn't be ignored. Ticket prices surged when her games were announced. Television ratings didn't inch upward, they spiked. Arenas filled faster, social media buzzed louder. And in that moment, something fundamental began to change. Achievement still mattered, championships still mattered. What A'ja Wilson had built over years didn't suddenly disappear. But now, something else was sitting at the same table. Reach. Not potential, not promise. Reach. The ability to pull attention, to expand the audience, to bring new eyes into the sport. And once that variable entered the conversation, the definition of face of the league became more complicated than it had ever been before. Because now, dominance and disruption were sharing the same space, and they weren't entirely comfortable together. When this tension finally reached the public, nuance didn't stand a chance. It never does. Media thrives on contrast, not coexistence. Every highlight became a comparison. Every standout performance turned into a debate. A big night from Clark wasn't just impressive, it was framed as a statement. A dominant game from Wilson wasn't just expected, it became a counter-argument. Fans didn't sit back and appreciate both. They chose sides, often without even realizing they were doing it. Some gravitated toward what Wilson represented: sustained excellence, proven greatness, the kind of career built brick by brick over time. Others were drawn to Clark's energy: explosive, unpredictable, transformative. One symbolized stability, the other symbolized evolution. And once that divide formed, it took on a life of its own. But beneath the noise, beneath the debates and the comparisons, something deeper was happening, something bigger than either player. The WNBA wasn't just witnessing a rivalry, it was experiencing a shift. For years, the league had been building, layer by layer, season by season, establishing credibility, developing stars, earning its place in the broader sports landscape. Players like Wilson were the foundation of that growth, carrying the league through years when attention was harder to come by. Now, that foundation was being tested in a different way, not by decline, but by expansion. Because what Caitlin Clark brought wasn't just talent, it was scale. She wasn't replacing what came before, she was amplifying it, even if it didn't always feel that way. The surge in attention didn't erase Wilson's impact. It highlighted how much the league had evolved to even make this moment possible. But growth is rarely comfortable. It stretches expectations, it forces reevaluation, it creates tension between what was and what's becoming. And that tension often gets misinterpreted as conflict. In reality, it's transformation. The league is no longer operating under a single definition of greatness. It's navigating multiple ones at the same time. There's the greatness of consistency, of dominance, of championships earned over years. And there's the greatness of influence, of reach, of the ability to bring millions of new eyes into the game. And for the first time, those two forces are colliding in real time. And maybe that's why this moment feels so different. It's not just about who's better, it's about what matters more, or at least what matters now. Because the truth is, the WNBA doesn't have to choose. It doesn't have to decide between A'ja Wilson and Caitlin Clark. It can hold both. It can celebrate the foundation while embracing the future. It can recognize that one built the stage while the other is expanding the audience. But whether fans, media, and even the league itself can fully accept that complexity is another question entirely. Because it's easier to pick a side than to understand a shift. And right now, the WNBA is in the middle of one of the most important shifts in its history, not defined by rivalry, but by growth that refuses to stay quiet. So the real story isn't just about two players, it's about a league learning how to handle something it's never quite experienced before. Attention at a scale that changes everything. And that leaves us with a question worth thinking about. Are we witnessing a passing moment or the beginning of a new era? Is this tension something that will settle over time, or is it the new normal for a league that's finally stepping into a bigger spotlight? Let me know what you think. Are you team sustained dominance or explosive evolution? Or do you believe the WNBA's future depends on both? If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the conversation, because this story is only just getting started. Every quote started to feel loaded. Words that once carried no weight suddenly felt like they were being dissected under a microscope. A neutral statement wasn't just a neutral statement anymore. It became a clue, a signal, something to be interpreted and reinterpreted depending on who was watching. Even silence began to speak. And in a landscape driven by constant conversation, silence doesn't stay neutral for long. It becomes a narrative of its own. Respect, too, began to shift in tone. What used to sound like admiration could now be heard as hesitation. What once felt like acknowledgement could now be framed as resistance. It didn't take direct conflict to create tension. The rivalry didn't need to be declared out loud, didn't need press conferences or dramatic exchanges. It existed in perception, in the way fans read between the lines, in the way conversations stretched beyond what was actually said. And perception moves faster than facts ever could. While timelines filled with arguments and debates intensified with every game, the most important decisions weren't being made in public. They rarely are, because beyond the noise of social media and highlight reels, there's another layer of basketball that operates differently, quieter, more calculated, less emotional. International basketball doesn't care about narratives built at home. It doesn't pause for debates about popularity or momentum. The game itself changes when it crosses borders. The pace tightens, the physicality increases, space becomes harder to find, and whistles come less often. What works in one environment doesn't always translate to another, and that's where evaluation begins to shift. In those settings, certain skills start to matter more. Shot creation that doesn't rely on drawing contact becomes essential. Range becomes more than a weapon, it becomes a necessity. A player who can stretch the floor without needing a system built around them suddenly carries a different kind of value. When a shot goes up from 30 feet, there's no debate, no negotiation with defenders or referees. It either falls through the net or it doesn't. That kind of simplicity travels. Interior dominance still matters, it always will, but in tighter systems, in games where every inch is contested, even the strongest presence has to fight for space. It has to adjust. It has to find new ways to operate when the environment shifts around it. And this is where the conversation behind closed doors becomes very different from the one happening in public. Committees don't frame their decisions emotionally. They don't ask who deserves recognition or who has earned their place through history. They ask questions that are far more strategic, far more forward-looking. Who can bend a defense in any system? Who remains effective when officiating becomes unpredictable? Who creates spacing before the offense even begins to take shape? Those questions don't always produce comfortable answers. Because when they're laid side by side, they don't just evaluate the present, they start outlining the future. Selection committees don't argue on television, they don't explain their reasoning in real time, and they certainly don't engage in debates on social media. Every decision they make is part of a larger projection. A roster spot isn't just a reward for what a player has already done, it's an investment in what the team will need years from now. They look for composure under pressure. They look for adaptability across different systems, different styles of play, different expectations. They examine how a player's presence shifts team chemistry when roles evolve, when responsibilities change, when the game itself demands something new. From the outside, nothing appears unusual. The same players perform, the same highlights circulate, the same narratives repeat themselves. But internally, direction begins to form. And that direction isn't always loud. It doesn't come with announcements or dramatic turning points. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but for those inside the system, it's unmistakable. A shift in how younger players are evaluated, a growing emphasis on skills that translate globally, a recognition that comfort under scrutiny isn't a risk, it's stability. Veterans still carry respect. That doesn't disappear. It doesn't fade overnight. But respect and inevitability are not the same thing. Once organizations begin planning 5, 6, even 10 years ahead, memory starts to matter less than momentum. What a player has done remains important, but what they are becoming and what they represent moving forward begins to take priority. And that's when the temperature changes. Not dramatically, not in a way that makes headlines, but enough that everyone involved can feel it. A quiet realization that something is evolving, that the balance between past and future is no longer fixed. This is where momentum and legacy finally meet. Legacy is built over time. It's constructed through years of dominance, through consistency that doesn't waver, through proof that no longer needs explanation. It stands on its own, solid and undeniable. Momentum is different. It doesn't wait for validation. It doesn't slow down to acknowledge what came before. It builds quickly, fueled by attention, by reach, by the ability to draw new audiences into the game at a pace that history can't match. Ajaya Wilson represents the full realization of legacy, the finished product of years of excellence, the kind that defines an era through sustained performance. Caitlin Clark represents something else entirely, acceleration, a force that doesn't just fit into the existing structure, but reshapes it, altering spacing on the court, behavior off it, and expectations for what comes next. Neither force is wrong, neither invalidates the other, but they can't occupy the exact same center forever. And when organizations begin thinking in long timelines, they don't just ask who is the best right now, they ask a more complicated question, one that carries more weight than any stat line or highlight. Who defines tomorrow? That question alone changes everything. Because now the conversation isn't limited to performance on the court. It extends into boardrooms, into media scheduling decisions, into endorsement strategies and long-term league planning. The shift isn't isolated, it's systemic. Influence is being measured differently now. It's no longer just about championships or efficiency ratings. Those still matter, but they're no longer the only metrics that shape decisions. Now there's something else being tracked, something less tangible but just as powerful. Pull. Reach, the ability to move culture, not just defenders. Social media accelerates styles faster than titles can accumulate. A single season can reshape perception in ways that used to take years. Global audiences respond to pace, to confidence, to range, qualities that traditional evaluations didn't fully capture before. And once those signals start influencing decisions, the entire ecosystem begins to adapt. That's why this moment doesn't feel like a rivalry, it feels like a recalibration. The definition of what it means to be the face of a league is evolving in real time, and when that definition changes, everything connected to it begins to shift as well. Marketing strategies, media coverage, fan expectations, even the way players are developed and evaluated. Power in sports rarely disappears all at once. It doesn't collapse or announce its departure. It moves gradually, almost invisibly, one decision at a time, one game placed in a different time slot, one endorsement deal structured differently, one long-term plan adjusted to reflect a new reality. A'ja Wilson's greatness hasn't gone anywhere. It hasn't diminished, and it won't. What she's built is permanent. It's etched into the league's history in a way that can't be undone. But permanence isn't the same as centrality. For years, the center felt fixed, predictable, anchored. Now it feels fluid. Caitlin Clark didn't take anything away. She didn't replace what existed before her. She introduced something new into the equation, something that expanded the scope of what the league could be. And when gravity changes, everything else has to adjust. This isn't a downfall. It isn't even a traditional rivalry. It's an inflection point, a moment where the league is quietly deciding its future, not through headlines or debates, but through choices that will only fully reveal their impact over time. Choices about what to prioritize, what to amplify, and what direction to move in as the game continues to grow. The answer won't be obvious right away. It won't be written in a single season or defined by a single player alone. It will emerge gradually, shaped by those who adapt, those who evolve, and those who understand that the spotlight in sports is never owned. It's only held for a moment before it shifts again. And maybe that's the real story unfolding here. Not who's winning the debate today, but who understands what the game is becoming tomorrow. So, where do you stand in this shift? Do you value legacy built over time, or momentum that changes everything in an instant? Or do you believe the future of the WNBA depends on both forces? Let me know your thoughts. And if you're enjoying this kind of deep dive storytelling,